we're ready.
Yeah. So maybe I can just introduce myself. My name is Daniel. I'm a PhD student here at the Department of Technology and Social Change at Linköping. I'm also part of the Seed Box, and I write my dissertation on conceptions about the nature of technology in the history of the geosciences. But I was thinking I would not directly speak about my research here, but indirectly, and I thought I would use my time to try to convince you that the question about the nature of technology is one of the most pressing questions in the face of global environmental change. And I will do so by dividing my talk into 3 short steps. So I will begin by defining what I mean by the nature of technology. And secondly, I will continue by explaining why and how the nature of technology on the one hand and global environmental change on the other are interconnected or associated. And then last but not least, I will attempt to formulate or spell out the concern regarding the nature of technology in the context of global environmental change. So what do I want to get at then with this emphasis on the nature of technology? Why not just technology full stop? Does not bringing its nature complicate stuff and make it more difficult to convince people? Well, I think unfortunately it does make it more difficult, and part of this difficulty has to do with the fact that the attitude that there is something like a nature or an essence to technology has been extremely unpopular, at least since the late 1970s. So according to most contemporary critics of technology, this kind of approach remains too abstract and too sweeping. So it's too abstract because it fails to take into consideration very specific situations in the real world, and too abstract because it speaks of technology with a capital T, so it doesn't take into consideration specific artifacts in the world. So as a result of this, one can say that scholarship in the philosophy of technology have since tended to avoid ontological questions, and it has focused on constructive models or pragmatic analyses instead. So we must go back almost all the way to Martin Heidegger's later work in the 1940s and the 1950s in order to find this approach still somewhat mainstream. And what Heidegger did, interestingly enough, was not that he argued that there is such a cross-cultural or universal common denominator to technology, but he decided to interrogate why it is that we find such an idea so preposterous in the first place. So in effect, one can say that what Heidegger did was that he turned the tables around. So he declared that he wanted to study the genealogy of the idea that technology is simply an instrument, that there is no meaning to technology beyond the fact that it's used to produce some sort of external purpose or so. And the crucial point here, of course, what he wanted to get at is that this implies that instrumentality was not always how technology was thought of. But according to Heidegger, this notion that technology is merely instrumental, that there is no nature or meaning to it, is a particularly modern phenomenon. So in his view, the fact that we're discouraged to ask questions about its nature or its essence is essential to the very era that we live in. So it's characteristic of modernity to think of technology in this way, as without an essence or without nature. And what I mean by the nature of technology then is precisely this historically situated meaning that is always implicit in discussions about technology. And following Heidegger, I think that there's something essential to modernity in that we tend to feel a little bit uneasy or so whenever we hear the word essence. And because of this uneasiness, or because we're discouraged to think about it in these terms, technology tends to blend and almost to extend into all other domains. And one such example is the domain of nature. So let me continue to the second step then, to put this into perspective. Because this interface between nature and artifice has been a central cause of concern behind the discussions about technology in the current geoscientific discourse that deals with global environmental change, that is to say, environmental change on a global level, on a planetary level, basically. So the widespread adoption of the term Anthropocene, for instance, indicates the wide acceptance of the view that human activities have become such a powerful driving force for environmental change that our very legacy will be recorded in geological history. That is to say, it will be recorded in the geological stratum of the Earth. So, in addition to the natural processes then of the Earth's geospheres, our planet now also includes an amorphous fabric of technologies. And this fabric consists of all the structures basically that are fundamental to our daily lives. So we can think of everything from houses to farms to factories, airports and computer systems to landfills or spoil heaps. And in a paper that was published last year, it was estimated that the bulk of the planet's man-made structures consists of some 30 trillion tons. So 30 trillion tons, representing a mass of more than 50 kilos for every square meter of the Earth's surface. So thanks to surge in the rate of technological development, it is argued, humans now move more rock and soil than all of the Earth's glaciers and rivers combined. And we fix more nitrogen in the soil than microbial activity does. And we consume such vast quantities of the Earth's resources so as to qualitatively alter the very structure of the Earth. So in short then, one could say from the perspective of history of ideas that the very idea of a sublime nature has been replaced by that of technological environment. So humans, it is argued, has transformed the planet at nearly every scale we are capable of measuring, such that the very distinction between what is artificial and what is natural has come to lose its meaning. And perhaps there is no clearer illustration of the extent that human impact has than the fact that maintaining the diversity of species and the functioning of ecosystems is dependent on an ever-increasing human involvement. But then this is also its irony that nature is possible only insofar as there is a growing scale of human enterprises to maintain nature through very artificial conservation practices. So this leads us into step number 3, because as we begin to see, I think, claims and arguments about the nature of technology in the face of global environmental change are not only diverse, but they are fundamentally ambivalent, I would claim. That is to say, precisely at the moment when the power of modern technology has become recognized as very dangerous due to the fact that we can destabilize all the processes that are very crucial for our own survival, technology has also become to be viewed as increasingly natural. So in other words, as the technical modification of nature has become more prevalent, the very form of technology starts to become invisible and its boundaries starts to become a little bit unclear. So eventually within these discourses, there is virtually no question of nature, since nature is intimately bound up with technology. Nor is technology any longer merely prosthetic, meaning an artificial supplement or replacement, but rather a central component of all the processes that we call natural. And that, I think, is one of the central concerns that we face today, which is to say that we face a very real problem of specifying just what technological drivers of change are, let alone determine what measures will be necessary to slow or reverse this change. And that, I think, is not so much a question of calculation, although calculation, of course, is very crucial. I mean, the qualitative sciences, of course, are extremely important, but it's also an ontological question about how do we distinguish nature from technology in the first place. Right, thank you.